Welcome to the Tuesday show. Today we only have one story and an opinion about that story, which is going to be my opinion and what happened with Jim Ryan and pushing out a bunch of executives and what it means for PlayStation. But before we get into that, make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe, and let's get into it. So PlayStation was kind of on a roll when it came to their CEOs and the people who kind of managed PlayStation. Usually the people who manage PlayStation and done a good job end up going to be CEO of Sony, because PlayStation's that important to Sony is that it brings in the most revenue out of everybody in their branches of things that they own. And so it's understandable why you would more than likely be kind of being taken seriously for the role of Sony if you did a good job at PlayStation. And we've seen it happen before with former PlayStation employees becoming CEO and be CEO for a long time. And the unfortunate thing is that Jim Ryan is the first person that PlayStation has put in a position of power that objectively left PlayStation in such a bad spot because of all the horrible things he did. One of the things that I think is the third worst thing that Jim Ryan has done, and if you think about it, we're in a bad start if live service games is at number 3 of the top 3 worst things that you did at PlayStation. And number 3 has to be the fact that he forced a bunch of first-party games that had no business making live service games. These are people who are used to making single player like linear stories or open world games, but not necessarily like online games as a service games. But like, I really don't blame them for doing this, because live service games make a lot of money, and if you even can get one, that's a big start, and that's more than Sony's done in their entire like existence. I don't think they've ever really had a good online game. They've had the Uncharted games, they've had the Last of Us multiplayer games that were pretty good. Like, their games were kind of fun. I love the Uncharted 2 multiplayer, but at the same time, it was like they've never really made cash off of those. You know, they never made Fortnite money off of those. And I don't blame him for doing that, but the way that he went about it was completely wrong. And I think he knew he was completely wrong, because number 1 on this list kind of coincides with number 3. But before we get to number 1, let's get to number 2. Number 2 has to be the mismanagement that he had during the pandemic. And of course, you kind of can't blame Jim Ryan for the pandemic and the shortage of PlayStations, but the fact that he mismanaged it so poorly that they had to raise the prices of almost everything on PlayStation, from the controllers to the PlayStation itself to charging for a stand. Like, it was just kind of like some scummy stuff that he had been managing PlayStation to do. And it was very unlike PlayStation to do that kind of thing. PlayStation has done scummy things, but to raise the prices of their consoles, I think they've never done. From at least that I've been following them and been a fan of them, they've never really done something like that. They've raised prices in games. He was also one of the guys who managed in raising the prices of games. So it's like, I do blame them for doing this kind of thing. I do blame Jim Ryan, because Xbox was more than willing to dish out money to grab exclusive chip making in factories, and PlayStation was not willing to do that. Sony was not willing to do that, and that was under Jim Ryan's management. We've seen other CEOs deal with shortages quickly and swiftly. Of course, this was a pandemic, but at the same time, I've seen PlayStation manage shortages. If you think shortages were bad with the PS5, the PS2 was even worse. Everybody wanted a piece of the PS2, but the CEO at the time knew what he was doing and knew how to kind of negotiate these kinds of things. And Jim Ryan had no idea what he was doing. And his best solution was to make it scarce and to charge more for games, to charge more for the console, and charge more for the controller. And it's left PlayStation kind of in this position where it's like, yeah, PlayStation makes some of the best games in the world. Every single year they have Game of the Year games, but like, they kind of have this scummy taste to them. Like, they're kind of like a bittersweet company now. Like I said, PlayStation has done bad things before, but this one was pretty bad. And number 1 of the worst things that Jim Ryan has ever done is pushing out executives who would push back on trying to make these first-party studios do like live service games and gas games. And It was the worst thing that he could have done, because now that PlayStation is kind of like backing up from doing live service games, they're still going to keep making live service games and try to push it, but they're not going to push the developers and force them to make games that they don't want to make. One of the casualties of this whole thing is, like I said, he pushed out a lot of executives that had been there for a long time. One of them being Shuhei Yoshida, that was at PlayStation for 31 years. According to Yoshida, the move from him going to first party to indie was more of a either you go do that or you get fired. Of course, he was enthusiastic about working for the indie area of PlayStation that took care of all that, and Shuhei Yoshida has always been a big indie fan. Anytime he was at E3, he would be trying to take photos, videos, and retweeting these companies so that way they could get more traction and more people playing their game. And he's always been very supportive. But of course, this was without a doubt a demotion. This is a guy who oversaw games like Uncharted, The Last of Us, Infamous, Marvel Spider-Man, Horizon, God of War, Little Big Planet, Resistance. All these games were because of Shuhei Yoshida. Bloodborne is one of the games that Shuhei Yoshida oversaw. And Demon Souls was a game that Shuhei Yoshida oversaw. This man single-handedly made a genre come to life because of his input into studios. Souls games would not exist without Demon Souls. Demon Souls then made Dark Souls, Dark Souls then made Bloodborne, Bloodborne then made Elden Ring, and etc. of all the Souls-like games that have come out. And it's a shame that because he was in such a power trip of trying to make these live service games and trying to implement things that didn't make sense, like raising the price of PlayStation, like the raising the price of video games, and like raising the price of I think of PlayStation Plus as well, which that one I don't mind so much, but everything else was just kind of unacceptable. And I think there was an outcry on the inside of PlayStation when it came to its developers and when it came to a lot of the people that worked there. Another individual that used to work there was Shawn Layden. And as soon as Jim Ryan abolished the individual headquarters of various branches, they fired Shawn Layden. Another guy that would have pushed back on this kind of scenario of trying to make things that PlayStation isn't. And while, yes, I agree that making live service games are a thing that PlayStation should look into, they should get better at making multiplayer games, it should be more of an organic thing. The reason why PlayStation is so good at first-party single-player games is because that was organically made. These are things that PlayStation has been doing for the beginning of PlayStation. Let developers make what they want to make. Let developers make what they're passionate about. Is it going to cost you money? Yes. Are you going to run into some blunders? Absolutely. But then you don't get games like The Last of Us, Infamous, Marvel Spider-Man, Horizon, God of War, Little Big Planet, Resistance, Demon Souls, Bloodborne. Like, these are things that PlayStation has been doing for the longest time. And it doesn't really make sense that Herman Holst was prompted to CEO of PlayStation and kind of was co-CEOing with another co-CEO. And now he's not co-CEO. And I think the reason why that is because Herman Holst was one of the reasons that PlayStation went into all these bad moves. It's speculated that Shuhei Yoshida and Shawn Layden and other executives were pushed out, and Herman Holst was picked up from his studio of the Horizon studio, Guerrilla Games, in order to do the things that Jim Ryan was going to do. So I think they kind of understood that, like, yeah, you're part of the problem, my guy. Like, you shouldn't be making executive decisions when one of your babies was Concord, and also you kind of oversaw all that things that PlayStation Studios didn't really want to do. And it's rumored that Naughty Dog was one of the people that went to the CEO to Sony to tell them, hey, look, either it's us or him. And I'm pretty sure they told Jim Ryan, hey, we want you to amicably resign and retire and say that you're tired of traveling, make whatever BS excuse that you want to make in order for you to leave. And I think the same for Herman Holst came in is, Herman Holst knows what to do when it comes to first-party studios, but he's not really, like, involved when it comes to, he's not really not involved, he's not really experienced when it comes to making live service games. Like, he's made Killzone, and the multiplayers have been good for that game, but at the same time, they weren't extremely successful like Call of Duty or Fortnite or these other live service games that have been out there. So like it makes sense that they left him as PlayStation first party studio CEO and oversee that, because he still made Horizon, he still made these other games that are good. And but I doubt that they're going to be making him direct studios to forcefully make games that they're not comfortable making. I think PlayStation understands that first party games and letting your first party studios do the things that they're good at is the thing that PlayStation needs to do forward. Now, the only thing that I hope with this new CEO of PlayStation is that he understands that PlayStation gamers are not to be taken advantage of. Raising game prices was okay, like, I guess, like, at the same time, like, that is insane. Raising console prices after 4 years is insanity. Raising prices of controllers is also insanity. I hope that PlayStation understands that, yes, they have a lot of goodwill that they built over the years. They have me as a big fanboy that I love them a lot. But at the same time, I really hope PlayStation just kind of takes a step back and understands that these aren't things that are going to make PlayStation be what it has been for the last 30 years. And that's dominating the landscape because of the fact that you know how to A, do business first, and 2, appease the fans at the same time. And I really hope PlayStation understands that. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Do you think that PlayStation is going in the right direction? What do you think about this whole thing of Shuhei Yoshida being pushed out? And remember, you're pretty good.